Say hi. Hi. Say hi. You just woke up, is it? You haven't slept. You haven't slept. Mama has been holding you for so long. You haven't slept.
Still she hasn't slept.
Yeah. What's that? What's that? That's the camera. Camera. I don't know. I think I had a certain level of faith in Jesus.
Yeah.
But looking back in retrospect, it's probably like a very existential understanding of him. But the basic stuff like Jesus died and was raised, I can be forgiven, life is about God, the Bible is the ultimate authority, so things like that I knew before coming to CRC, but I think it was through a number of sermons, I think no less the first Get It, which started reshaping my thinking about God.
Yeah.
It's quite subtle. Originally, for example, I used to, it's like one day I feel like following Jesus, then I follow again, and a day I don't feel like following, then I don't lah. But then I remember distinctly one of the Get It talks about God, and his kingship and his judgment, where I think Robin mentioned things like God is not just king when you God is king regardless of whether you make him king in your heart. That's when it struck me, and I begin to understand that repentance is not just about whether at the moment you feel like repenting, because you're always confronted with a God who is bigger than you.
Yeah, okay. So the first time you came to CRC was through Get It, is it?
I think during Roman series.
Yeah. Okay. By that time, would you say you become clearer as a Christian already? Was that a turning point before that made you a lot clearer about Christianity?
I think GGF helped. So I got to know about Reformed theology more through GGF rather than CRC. So that in many ways helped prep me for understanding and appreciating what this church is doing.
Yeah.
And there was a number of readings. I'm a bookworm. At least I consider myself a bookworm. So I think even during my CF days, before I got to know CRC and the rest of the people, I have been searching online, just watching through videos about what it means to be a disciple, to lead the church. I was involved in some ministries back in my old church. Yeah, so eventually it got me to Desiring God, the Gospel Coalition, and I started buying books written by John Piper, Don Carson. So that helped me to rethink about theology, Christianity, the gospel.
Okay, got it. Was it tough to understand Reformed theology at the start?
I guess, yeah, it was, because I guess the tough thing wasn't quite the exegesis, because even though that was challenging, there was, I remember a period of time where I was forced to unlearn a number of bad habits in Bible reading, and just to relearn the skills to read properly. But once I got past that, the more challenging part is more like being confronted with these realities. So there was one point of time where I very early on where I saw things so clearly that God is sovereign, God is king, and he rules over all aspects of life, where I contemplated. So I was confronted with one or two choices. It's either I commit my life to Him and go all out, or I leave the faith, I apostatize. Yeah. So that's when I think I became a disciple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned Get It and the Roman series being one of your earlier exposures to CRC.
Yeah.
What was some of your first impressions about CRC?
I was brought up to be, in my earlier church background, to be a biblicist, and that meant that my pastor kept emphasizing on stage that we are people of the Word. It was a Pentecostal church, by the way. We are people of the Word, and we need to have a Berean attitude, whereby whoever comes and preach anything, we should search the scriptures for ourselves and to verify whether it's correct. If it's correct, then just accept it, because it's from God. Otherwise, you reject it lah. So I guess that helped lay the foundation for a right attitude towards listening to God's words, which then I think eventually when Mark Leong came to CF and he started preaching through Ephesians, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this guy is preaching through the Bible. This is good stuff, and I should listen.
Yeah.
Same goes to the CRC sermons in Romans and Get It and all that. It's just working off the text and understanding what it means, seeing how everything is being pieced together as a whole, so that you have a big view of God and life. And
Okay. So you eventually came to CRC. What was it? I think you mentioned it was through a blog, is it?
Yeah. When I first found out about CRC, I was like, I'm a website guy lah. I think back in those days, there weren't too many apps yet. So I searched Desiring God and the Gospel Coalition. So naturally, when I came across this church, CRC, I started searching his website. Okay, is there anything I can find out about this church? And there are sermons. I watched a number of them from the Acts series, and I read the blogs. I think one of it was written by Jolie. I can't quite remember the detailed contents, but I distinctly remember one of the, like him saying something along the lines of what led him to commit his life to this church was that this church is serious about applying the things that we know about God to everyday life. And that struck me as interesting because I guess I'm also a serious kind of guy. And he did mention that, if you think in terms of investment, this of all churches, if you want to compare them and to weigh out which one deserves your investment your whole life, it would be this church. So I thought, that makes sense. I need to weigh out what it means for a church to be faithful, and if it is worth investing in, then I should give my whole life to that church and to build up God's kingdom through the ministry.
Okay. So after that, I guess you started to come to CRC a bit more, just to weigh out what you just said. So what was your evaluation of CRC after that?
I think the first sermon that I sat through, after half an hour I started having a headache. But over time the appetite for God's word grew. and I think as far as I can tell, this church is faithful, and that got me started on.
Okay, got it. So eventually you started coming a bit more regularly, and eventually you started wanting to become a member in CRC. What was the thought process behind that?
I think it's more of like I was previously committed to a church, another local church, but because I slowly started to realize that my beliefs are not really aligned, my gospel convictions weren't really aligned with the other church, and back then they had somewhat like a membership course, so they did mention if there are certain points of doctrine which you do not agree with, we welcome you to leave. We do not hold you back. So I spoke to the pastor, and I left, and I guess the next thing to do is to just find another church and to commit your life to it lah. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think you mentioned to me just now off camera that you are a structure guy. You love structure and order. Do you see that in CRC, or maybe another way for me to phrase that is, how do you understand structure and order within the context of church and ecclesiology?
Simple things like things are coming right now. For example, my first one of the first few things that I caught from what Robin said or wherever, I don't remember that, was that Sundays we don't call Sunday service because it's not about you being served, but we call it Sunday gatherings. So it reflects the idea, the reality that Christ gathers His church by His word, and we are gathered to build one another up in the faith. So even those little these tiny shifts in terminology help me understand what this church is trying to emphasize, and it helps me to see more clearly how the things we learn in the Bible about the gospel of God, it has implications to the way we run things in church, and that started opening up my mind to observe other things, like how this church runs its finances, how this church structures its leadership, how GGs are run. What else? Yeah, a number of things, to all the way to the architecture lah. So I guess that inspired the way I design my home.
Yeah. Okay. So you are the GG leader for Kepong GG at the moment. How long has it been again?
Since early 2019, so it's about 4 years.
Wow.
now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So what is your philosophy in terms of running a growth group? What do you think a growth group should be?
I think I've always philosophy. I think we've always understood growth groups, especially adult growth groups, to be kingdom outposts. So there is the church, and the church gathers in GGs on Thursdays in various locations in the Klang Valley. So we want to make the gospel as accessible to people in the in all over the regions as possible. So, and because of that, because GGs are an outpost, we should be a very good. We should be trained well to minister to people around us. So that involves a lot of calling people to be committed. It sounds very sounds very simple, but it's just this kind is just something which a disciple needs to do. But I think the challenge is to call for this commitment on a weekly basis, and to set up a number of avenues which CRC and even GGF provides for these people to be trained. So things like soccer helps a lot, and yeah, so I guess my philosophy is to build a strong core group and not just rely on one person. I don't consider myself a great leader, like someone who can rally a number of people. So knowing this, I tend to build a team, and I tend to want to build a team. So if I were able to build a strong core group that is able to minister to various people, then the gospel is able to grow from that GG to outward.
Yeah. I can tell that being a GG leader definitely isn't a walk in the park. So what has been some of the struggles or experiences being a GG leader that you've had to deal with? And how do you think about it as well?
I think what's unique to my GG is that people here are more Chinese, meaning they're more compliant in a way. They follow the leader. As long as there's a guy up front, then they're willing to listen, follow, do the things that they do.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the greatest challenge is to instill in them a ministry mindset that is not based on what the leader says. The other challenge is illiteracy. So I myself am not very literate. I think people over here struggle in all languages. So even if their first spoken language was English, it's not necessarily the case that they know how to read their English Bibles. So people here don't major in any language. So the challenge is to increase that literacy week in, week out, to impress upon them the need to do that, so that you can be grounded in the scriptures, and to call for the commitment that comes together with it, which is like prepare before GG. If there's a good conference coming up, you should always sign up for it, and to fast track your development as a disciple.
So I'm aware that you are planning to start CMA soon to assess a life of full-time faith ministry.
Yeah.
So what's the thinking behind that?
I think it's the stuff that I said about going all out for God and His mission, based on what I learned in Ephesians. So that's the first thing. And to build God's church, I think in Ephesians 4 it says that Christ gave the apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers to teach up, so that the church is to be able. The church is filled with the truth and be able to build up one another in love. So building a church requires full-time paid ministers, people who are committed full-time to the task of preaching and teaching. So CMA is a way to test out whether I have preaching, teaching, leadership abilities. I am still not sure. I don't consider my teaching abilities great, So that's why I needed to be tested lah.
Okay. So you have a unique perspective as well of being a father, and I think you're still considered a young father, I would say, because your daughter's 2 years old at the moment, right?
14 months only, so...
Oh, okay, yeah, 14 months.
Yeah.
Okay. What has been the challenges of being a Christian father?
Christian father, I guess it's to not be bogged down by the worries in life, and to be wholeheartedly serving God in His ministry in the midst of childbirth and all that lah. So yeah, the first few months were definitely very tough because the newborn, the baby keeps waking up in the middle of the night, and it's like you lose your sleep. So I guess nowadays probably 30% of my brain power goes to the baby and the family. But at the same time, knowing what it means to love God and His church, and knowing the mission, and knowing that marriage and family life is not the be all and all. We're all looking forward to the return of Christ, where His people are gathered and united with Him eternally. So having this eternal perspective in mind, just the challenge is to not be bogged down by worries in life.